a fucktacular week. Felonious Trump was sworn in and will go through the lifetime damage he has already done in his first 5 days in office.
This week marks the 52 years since the Roe v. Wade decision, and the Pussy Comitatus celebrated by introducing a law that would remove protections for abortion clinics from Christian terrorists.
Also, Washington, D.C. hosted March for Life Madness, and Moji and I will bring you all the tea from the march, aka Unbornaroo, the largest anti-abortion gathering in the world.
And joining us to cover all of it is Professor of Constitutional Law and Global Health at Georgetown University, Dr. Michele Goodwin.
All of it coming up on this episode of the Feminist Buzzkils podcast, the show that doesn't need a pardon because we're breaking the law all the time. I'm Liz Winstead, and I'm joined by my co-host, Moji Alamodale.
Hello, we have a lot to get to. And just to make it one of the worst weeks in our lifetime, we lost a giant in the reproductive health community. Cecile Richards lost her battle with brain cancer at age 67 this week.
If you're not familiar with Cecile Richards, she was the juggernaut behind Planned Parenthood for decades. She was somebody who took on Congress. She took on all of those fake videos that were shot at Planned Parenthood. And she's somebody who really was outspoken, fearless, and really just helped people understand reproductive health in a way that was really profound.
Yeah, she will be missed in this fight as the fight gets harder. She leaves a legacy.
She does. She comes from a long line of incredibly strong women. Her mom was Ann Richards, the former governor of Texas, the last Democratic governor. And as we are in this moment, I want to share a quote of Cecile's that sort of sets the tone for where we are right now. It's not hard to imagine future generations one day asking, when there was so much at stake for our country, what did you do? The only acceptable answer is everything we could. And Moji and I think we promised that we're going to do our best.
100% committed to doing everything we can in Cecile's honor.
And I think that means we're going to let people know all the garbage that's happening in the world.
Before we get to our packed show, Liz and I are going to drop a steaming dump of this week's abortion news.
What the shrooms in socialism, Vermont? A new lawsuit against the state reveals its child welfare agency has been secretly tracking pregnant people it deems unsuitable for parenthood. Claims include dilation status reported to the state in real time, not being informed that their baby would be taken by the state at birth, and trying to force patients into mandatory C-sections. Sounds like the next Ben & Jerry's flavor should be government coercion.
Yuck. More of this, please. Mississippi State Senator Bradford Blackman has hilariously introduced the Contraception Begins at Erection Act. The bill would make it unlawful for a person to discharge genetic material without the intent to fertilize an embryo. Blackman's bill is an attempt to highlight the hypocrisy that laws relating to contraception or abortion only punish women. We can't wait for men to be charged with first-degree spermicide and unlawfully discharging with intent to kill.
Ding, ding. And free speech for me, but none for thee. Abortion-related content is already disappearing from internet searches, whether it's Trumplandia removing it from the HHS website or government-adjacent sites like Instagram. Abortion searches are returning either no results or blurred results, leaving people scrambling to find information. Censorship hasn't hit Google yet because when you type Trump is an abortion, you get 78 million results. This has been your steaming news dump.
Woo! That was some crappy-ass news, Liz.
It was crappy-ass news, but
we have a birthday.
A Patreon birthday, indeed. If you sign up for our Patreon, you get a birthday shout-out, and this week's birthday is a January baby.
Yes, it is. Carrie Cleach of Arizona had a birthday this month, and Carrie has been a longtime supporter of this pod and just a warrior along with us in moving abortion access forward. We want to wish you a happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Carrie. And go Arizona. So we had a lot happen in this first 5 days of this administration. And I touched on it briefly in the news dump about how you can't find abortion on the government websites and then it's being shadow banned on social media. But that's just really the tip of it, right?
Yeah.
They just straight up took down the entire website off the government page that was a repro website that helped folks access medication abortion, get right information about abortion. It was dispelling the myths. It was a really good resource for people looking for how to navigate abortion in the landscape post Dobbs, and just shut the fuck down. So not only is the word abortion nowhere, this repro website has been shut down, which is really terrifying.
It really is. Also, I might be saying this for the next 4 years, but this was also in the Project 2025 playbook. We just remove information, right? This is the censorship at its finest.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not just words that they're banning, it's organizations, it's partners in this work.
Right. I mean, Aid Access is an organization that we talk about a lot. And their Instagram page, they literally blurred graphics about where you can get access, how you can go to Aid Access and get information. In fact, when I was searching, you couldn't just go in that little search spyglass and write Aid Access and find the page. I went to their website and then clicked on their Instagram page to get there. So I think that there's some shenanigans around actually finding it within Instagram itself. And I don't know, I didn't try to look on Facebook either. I don't know if it's a meta-wide thing or it was an Instagram thing, but that's really disturbing. And so I think at Abortion Access Front, we're going to really start monitoring our work as well. And that's just our abortion work.
Right. That's just our abortion work. Also, when the announcement came that Meta was going to stop censoring whatever, I had in my naivete was like, oh, maybe we can actually talk about abortion in these spaces that we've not been able to. But it seems like, no, they're just censoring the good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the whole thing too. And I think like calling them out on the fact that, now you can just freely terrorize people on the internet and call them whores and say they're terrible people, but you can't advocate for legal health care in this country. That will be shadow banned. And that feels really scary. Also, it started for me when I started having accounts pop up in my feed saying, search the term Democrat or Democrats. And I did. And it was like hidden content is, because it's too dangerous to read. And the word Kamala, I know you had an experience on TikTok.
Couldn't find vaginal health for days. Like literally the only things I would get when I searched vaginal health on TikTok was an ad in the TikTok shop for a product that made your hoo-ha taste like fruits, which is not for a person seeking vaginal health. That's for their sexual partners.
Right. Because it takes a lot of yoga to make that work for you and your own vagina. For sure. So, we'll be trying to keep you updated on all this stuff. But again, it's why it's really important to support this pod and to support independent journalists and to really know where to look for when these things get shut down and shadowed. There's got to be secondary places. And some fuckery we're still waiting on is the imminent reinstatement of the global gag rule. And Moji, tell folks what it is and why this is such a disaster.
Oh my gosh. So the global gag rule is something that we anticipated this, right? Well, this is something that Republican presidents do every single time one comes into power since Ronald Reagan. And it essentially prohibits foreign non-governmental organizations who receive any U.S. global health assistance from talking about or providing legal abortion services at all, or referrals, or anything, even if it's not done with U.S. funds. And I just want to say, like, if you're anti, that might sound great to you, but this policy doesn't reduce the number of abortions. It has actually just increased unsafe abortions, and it's had negative impact on maternal, newborn, and child health. So this is terrible, not unexpected, but still fucking sucks.
Yeah, and that's why we have Dr. Goodwin coming on with us. We're going to give you just sort of the highlights, and then Dr. Goodwin, who is an expert on global health policy and constitutional law, we're going to break down some of these things that have already happened with her so that we can talk about the real world ramifications, how long this has been happening, and how we've also survived these kind of attacks before and how we can do it again. And, when you talk about health, they also cut funding for the World Health, or there was an executive order, I should say,
right,
to just remove ourselves from the World Health Organization, which, Moji, is that a thing the executive order can do?
It seems like we can't because we joined the World Health Organization, America, the country, joined the World Health Organization through a joint act of Congress. So I'm not quite sure just a stroke of the pen from a person who just walked into the Oval Office can undo it. But I think the lawyers are going to have to work that out. And this is a travesty because the World Health Organization is literally how the world, the globe, coordinates any sort of medical response. So this is wild, but we'll see how it plays.
Yeah. I mean, and also they're the place that we look to for our abortion protocols. We look to who for that, Thank God we haven't had a pandemic since 1918. So who needs who, right?
Not like there's an avian flu on the horizon at all. No, you don't have to
your
worry
price
about
of
that.
eggs, all that, yada, yada.
And while we're talking about shitty executive orders, the newest president has decided to declare that the federal government only has two genders via an executive order again. And what's really exciting about this, and by exciting, I mean terrible, is that they snuck in a little bit of personhood in there. It basically says that people are male or female from the moment of conception, which is ridiculous.
It's at around 10 weeks that there's actually any development of
reproductive organs, period.
So what are you even talking about?
Also, I think, they have been going on and on for years about like the problem with liberals is that they can't define a woman and a man. And literally the best they could do is female means a person belonging to at conception, the sex that produces the large reproductive cell. And male means the person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the small reproductive cell. Again, at conception, no one's producing any of that shit.
Exactly. And, this two gender declaration is just a lot of show, but there's also some scary stuff around it. And we wanted to really talk to Dr. Goodwin about what it means for you, your travel, your passport. Are you a transgender person? Are you an intersex person? Are you a gender queer, gender fluid person? Like, it has wide reaching ramifications that we want everybody to be thinking of so that people can keep themselves safe. So I feel like those were the big hits of what Trump did this week. And we can't end on bad news. So we have some good news before we bring in Dr. Goodwin to break down all this shit.
We do have some good news.
Yes, exactly. Democrats swatted down the fake Born Alive Act. As we've talked about before, this is this old chestnut that Republicans keep bringing up over and over again. And they try to couch this fake scenario and a fake solution for a fake scenario. And the fake scenario is that somehow a fetus is born alive at some point during an abortion. And this is a law that forces doctors to intervene if a fetus is born alive during an abortion. Now, anybody knows that that is not how abortion works. And that if an infant is born alive and needs paleo care from, let's say, some late tragedy, and somebody has to deliver an infant that will not survive more than minutes or hours, it removes the family from giving palliative care to spend time with that infant until it passes. It's just a ruse to pretend like they're fixing a problem that doesn't exist. And what it actually does is create a false narrative about what abortion is, and creates incredible harm to anybody who's parenting, who has to deliver a child that will not live outside the womb for very long, and help them make decisions to make sure the quality of life for as long as that infant has is good. It's really fucked up. So the good news is it didn't pass because they didn't have enough votes to end debate. You have to have 60 votes to end debate on a bill. And they didn't have those 60 votes. So technically they didn't get to vote on the bill. And the vote to end debate was, of course, on party lines, 52 Republicans, 47 Democrats, with one Republican abstaining, which you'd think that this would be some masturbatory time for them to vote to harm women. And somebody sitting it out is sort of shocking. But we're going to keep following this to see when it comes back up for a vote and where it lands. But they were trying to sneak it in right before the March for Life so they could use it as kind of like, look at the first thing we did. We're in business 10 minutes and we already passed the Born Alive Act. Well, they can't do that now. So I am taking that as a victory.
I actually stood up with my pom-poms and did a little high kick when I heard about it because that was the appropriate response.
Yep, it's good. So let's bring the expert on to sort of dissect this week and help us dissect the March for Life. I am so thrilled. Every time we have Dr. Michele Goodwin on the show, we're smarter. We have a history lesson. We have a contextual lesson, and we walk away feeling hopeful. So buckle up, because this is the person you need in this moment. She's the Linda D. and Timothy J. O'Neill Professor of Constitutional Law and Global Health Policy at Georgetown Law School. She's also a board member of Abortion Access Front and has an incredible podcast, the one and only Dr. Michele Goodwin. Hello, Dr. Goodwin.
Hello, welcome.
It is so good to be with you as always.
We're hoping for a warm blanket, but it's okay if the blanket's thin because we know you don't control the political weather.
That's right. And we know that DEI doesn't control the weather either.
Turns out.
Who knew?
It turns out that being a highly accomplished woman and leading the fire department doesn't make you unqualified. And it doesn't mean that because you're a woman in charge that the Santa Ana winds kick up just because you're a woman in charge.
It's true. They're so mad about women being in charge. I've often said that, the patriarchy is fine with that woman that invented Spanx. Like, she can make her billions inventing Spanx, but a woman wants to run Goldman Sachs or be the Secretary of Defense
or the fire department head in a major city.
Nah.
Yeah.
Nah.
Well, on that point, given this devastation and just taking a pause to think about the lives of people that have been affected in the Palisades, how worse it could have been without her leadership.
Right.
And it's not paid attention to. And the fact that so many of the firefighters are also women, and some of these people incarcerated, and there's no sense of gratitude towards the sacrifices that they've made. In California, when you're scaling those hillsides, that's not machinery. That's not automotives that can go up there. Those are human beings that are scaling. And many of those happen to be people of color. And many of them happen to be Black and brown folks whose lives will now be threatened by this administration. And people aren't paying attention to that, but I know that you are. And so I'm really happy to be with you.
So we're going to have a really, I'm excited, in-depth conversation about, some of the things that we've seen in the first 65 years of this administration, AKA 3 days. And then we're going to talk about the March for Life and the power of the March for Life and sort of what we can expect to look for from the anti-abortion movement and how legally they're going to try to, shit the bed, quite frankly, is really what we're going to be looking at. So before we get into Trump and his executive orders, the first thing that we wanted to ask you about, because the tsunami of confusion masquerading as hope around the ERA was something that, as these last gasps of the Biden administration happened, and he was like, I believe the ERA is the 28th Amendment. Is it? Should we believe that?
What's it going to do to help us?
Yes.
Well, I'll put it this way. The president making that statement is important. Did it go through the process that is typical of this, which of an amendment being fully ratified and then made into law, which is that the archivist then publishes it? Just for the benefit of your listeners, it was the Trump administration that barred the former archivist from being able to publish it after the 38th state had said, yep, we have signed on, which was Virginia. And because of an action by Trump in a memo saying, do not publish this, and the archivist didn't do that. The archivist could have said, I'm ignoring the president and publishing it anyway, but the archivist didn't do that. Now we have a flip where Biden appointed an archivist who said, I won't publish it. And you have Biden saying, well, I believe that it's law. So why does he believe that? It's because the requisite number of states did ratify the amendment. Notably, when the ERA was passed, in its preamble, which is not actually part of the law, it puts a time limit on it. And so there is significant consensus amongst a number of constitutional law scholars that that preamble means absolutely nothing. So it's not time barred, and that it actually can then be facilitated by the archivist to become law. But that is not what happened. So you have the president saying, I believe it's law. And you have some constitutional law scholars saying, yep, president has said this. This is an advancement. It is now a matter of law. What it leaves behind is quite a bit of confusion for a number of people. For those who believe that it is law, they can begin to act in ways as if it is law. until it is challenged, at which point it goes up before the Supreme Court. And I imagine that with the Supreme Court, there would be heavy scrutiny of what this is. And Biden didn't push his archivist to publish it, as Trump had pushed his archivist not to publish it. So on one hand, there's hope and inspiration and aspiration, and I think that's important.
Okay, that doesn't clarify much. It gives us just a little bit of hope and a little bit more wondering, and I guess this will work out with legal people eventually.
Yeah. I think that that's the bottom line, because what you have is a president saying that it is law and it depends upon who you listen to.
Well, let's move on to Trump, because that has been my week. And one of the things that really got in our goat this week is that he made an executive order demanding that the federal government only recognize two genders. Obviously, in my life, the trans and intersex people evaporated immediately. But truly, can a president do this? And would the ERA be something we could use to prevent this being active and useful?
Arguably, it's nothing that a president can do. And let me explain why. And that is the fact that, one, the Supreme Court has recognized transgender status and, in fact, protected it through Title VII in a case called Bostock. The Supreme Court recognized that discrimination against individuals that are trans is unconstitutional, that it violates the Title VII, right? With having Gorsuch writing that opinion, one of the justices that Donald Trump nominated and was confirmed to the Supreme Court. But even more, it pays no attention to states' laws and pays no attention to health and science. This is an executive order that is really meant to harm people. It's not necessarily one that is meant to influence law, although it will in conservative states where there already have been attacks on gender-affirming care. There's a case going up before the United States Supreme Court that engages children, people who are preteens, who are non-binary and are receiving gender-affirming care. They're banned from receiving it in Tennessee, and that's the state that has issued the ban. And it's really interesting, and I'll just spend one moment on this and explaining why this is really about harm, although in some states where they're already attacking trans kids, there it only furthers what the legislature will do. In the Scrimetti case, it's a case in which the state is explicitly discriminating against kids that are trans. What the state has said is that there can be no gender-affirming care and also no estrogen or testosterone, but only if you happen to be trans. What the state has said is it's completely fine to use gender-affirming care for children who affirm that they are heterosexual. So if you want to use gender-affirming care to build more muscles because you want to look more boyish or manly and you identify as heterosexual, the state of Tennessee has no problem with that. If you want to have testosterone because you're on the wrestling team and you want to bulk up and you're a boy, state has no problem with that. So this is a case where there is explicit discrimination. And in those kinds of states, this executive order is probably seen as a beacon, as a point of hope. It'll be interesting to see what the Supreme Court does, both in that case and also with this executive order.
When are we supposed to get the ruling from that case? They argued that case in December, right?
Liz, what we've seen is that when it comes to TikTok, this is a court that can move rather quickly. When it comes to removing the former president from the ballot in Colorado because of January 6th, there are questions involving his criminal prosecution involving January 6th, then you can see a court moving very slowly. So if it's TikTok, it's quick. If it's a matter of national security and ethics and oaths of office, it could be really slow. So we don't know, Liz.
So, okay.
I just want to stay here for a quick second because also, one of the things that the federal government issues are passports. So what does this order mean for people whose passports have been amended to acknowledge that they have a different gender or use the X marker in their passport? What are we worried about?
Well, this should not have a retroactive effect. And the other part that makes the executive order quite confusing for many and inconsistent is that there really isn't a firm such thing as there's just boys and there's just girls. There are individuals that are born intersex, and that's a reality, and it's been documented for millennia, right? So it isn't rooted in science. The other thing is that after an individual has completed what they want in terms of a transgender status and now have their new name and their new gender identity and new driver's license and new passport, that's who they are. But I think that the import of what it is that the president is trying to do is saying none of that matters. We still see you, or he still sees those individuals and members of his party, many of them, though not all of them. It's meant to hurt and harm. It's meant to say that you can never be who you truly are. And that's interesting. And we could talk about it in terms of that, the kind of exercise of what that means, a kind of different version of a Jim Crow, like a kind of purple Jim Crow, where you have individuals saying, I see myself as a person with dignity and so much more. You cannot contain me in the stereotype that you have for me. So much of this is rooted in stereotype and in stigma.
I know lawsuits were filed. Who does a lawsuit on this challenging this executive order? Where does that lawsuit get filed and who's the first court to hear it?
Yes. Well, the ACLU has already gotten involved in this, and I can imagine that there are going to be a number of lawsuits that are filed by the ACLU involving this administration. During the last Trump administration, there are over 400, and the ACLU prevailed in a number of them, including in front of federal judges that were appointed by Donald Trump. So we can expect that there will be federal courts where the litigation will be filed. You can imagine that there will be plaintiffs that are selected based on being able to tell a particular story, to basically be able to narrate why, in fact, this is so harmful. And one of the things that you might see is something that was criticized vis-a-vis the Trump administration. Judge Matthew Kacsmaryk was nominated and confirmed by Donald Trump. He sits in Texas in a district where he is the lone federal judge, district court judge, Amarillo, Texas. And so there's a lot of critique about conservatives seeking to bring their cases directly to Judge Kacsmaryk. You're probably going to see a bit of this taking place where progressives are seeking out the judges that they believe will give a fair reading to what it is that they're contesting from the Trump administration.
If they're going to play dirty tricks, then we need to go on to some of these tricks too. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, and then we'll button up this particular executive order and move on to others, is the fact that we saw over the past couple of years in state legislatures how when their abortion ban laws failed, they were tacking anti-trans laws into these abortion bans. As we saw in this two-gender executive order, they slid in, Emoji and I talked about it a little earlier in the show, this sort of personhood language, right? That said, falsely, I can't remember how they said it, but it was like at the moment of conception, the little chromosome or whatever they call it.
It's like the body that produces the big reproductive cell, and then the one that reproduces the small reproductive cell. Yeah.
But it just feels like anytime they can, they will
trade school for obstetrics and gynecology. Right?
100%. And sliding personhood in when people don't read big bills is something that they do a lot. And in this new world order that we're looking at, I'm wondering if you, in looking at some of the cases that you believe are going to come down the pike, or some of the laws that you see, or ways that they can try to slip personhood in, if you could tell us what we should be looking for and how we should be like our own little sleuths about that.
Well, there are any number of areas where they're going to try. So, for example, it's been a long time that there's been a narrative about children born alive after abortion. It's not accurate. It's not true. The other thing that has been very confusing for people is using the language and the imagery of civil rights to do things that are actually quite counter to civil liberties and civil rights, including naming legislation after individuals like Frederick Douglass, right? You might see a Fannie Lou Hamer bill, right? And these will be bills that are actually about curbing the right to be able to terminate a pregnancy based on race, which basically is a direct racial attack on Black women and women of color being able to have abortions. We saw that before the Dobbs decision. We may, in fact, see even more of that. At the federal level, we may very well see members of Congress seeking to do more damage with the Comstock Act, right, to revitalize it. Wouldn't be surprised by that. One might also see other laws that have been literally not thought about in over 150 years being invoked, just like Trump did during the inauguration, invoking a law from 1789, right? So we're going to see more of that taking shape, both on the federal level and also on the state level. There's never been a personhood law that has been enacted by Congress. And in fact, states didn't even get to that until, recently, but it may be pushed forward. Something like that doesn't mean that it necessarily would pass, but that we might see. We might also see anti-abortion legislation that, even though we've had states engaged in ballot initiatives that have instantiated constitutional protections for abortion at the state level, we might see a federal ban that is proposed. We'll see if it actually gets enacted. So those are some of the things that can be thought about, and even more. I mean, we could just spend 2 hours just thinking through the possibilities.
Okay, so can you talk about the global gag rule, what it does, how it impacts people internationally, and what we should expect?
So the global gag rule is like it sounds. So President Reagan signed an executive order that would bar countries that are receiving aid from the United States in counseling any of those resources used to counsel with regard to abortion and reproductive matters. When there have been Democrats in office, they have lifted the ban, the argument being that this is a direct violation of human rights. This is a direct violation of principles of free speech. No country lives according to our Constitution, but we do. And we should not be imposing conditions that would not be upheld in the United States on other countries. Those have been some of the arguments about why this executive order should never be renewed. But every Republican president since Reagan has renewed this. And what it means is creating a tale of two cities, tale of two countries. It's a tiered disparity, meaning that what takes shape in the United States and what women in the United States would have access to, at least before Dobbs, was not something that the nations we were providing support to that they could get. And you could really see the racialized drama undergirding this. So there's the United States saying, okay, we'll give aid to this country that is developing, where there are brown people, but we'll make sure that women will not be counseled or get medical information that's associated with reproductive health care. How cruel, in fact, that happens to be. And that's been a practice now for over 40 years.
They love a good rollback. And we've seen the rolling back happening and the reintroduction of bills.
But can I just also say the rollback of constitutional freedoms, civil liberties, and civil rights? It's that rollback which has been so attractive and which has been so addicting, right? It's that drug. It's the drug of denying the full personhood and citizenship and humanity of people who live abroad. It's a practice that was honed and fine-tuned during Jim Crow, which could give someone, right, the expertise of thinking about how do you export this elsewhere. It's because we've seen it and practiced it here in the United States. But I digress.
Not a digression at all.
It's not a digression. And, we're watching how, what is violence, right? And as we look, we're going to talk about the March for Life and how these people are celebrating the violence that has been happened outside of clinics. They ignore the terrorism outside of clinics. In fact, Chip Roy, congressperson from Texas, reintroduced removing the FACE Act, which is the Freedom to Access Clinic Act, where you can't blockade somebody from accessing care. You can't invade a clinic. You can't threaten someone. And they do it all the time. And so they're going to be on stage begging for the freedom of the people who did this. The Thomas More Society, a very conservative law firm, is representing 21 of these people who are inmates for harming people. The Alliance for Defending Freedom, both of these law firms are very powerful anti-abortion Christian law firms, and they're supporting the March for Life. They are financially supporting the March for Life, and they have supported the March for Life. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about their influence and the morality and the hypocrisy of defending terrorism like January 6th and acting like it didn't happen, or overthrowing the election, and then saying that if we are vocal supporters of abortion rights, or we protest or in defense of immigrants, that we are terrorists. I don't understand it. Explain the history of how these law firms came to be and the power that they really have.
Let me say this, that there is the opportunistic originalism that we've seen with the court. Today they're originalist and tomorrow they're not. And what we've also seen is hypocrisy that is on full display. And there are many people who are worried. And they probably should be, because what we've also seen is the weaponization of threat. So for a very long time, there has been the funding of the movement to upend birthright citizenship, to upend reproductive freedom, to upend school desegregation and affirmative action, to upend women and pay equality and the potential of the ERA being ratified, to upend the environment. I share all of that to say that what you see on the reproductive rights front is actually intersectional and connected to these various other issues. And it's been long term, and there's been this sense of playing the long game. And what the long game produces in this context happens to be something that is like a Dobbs decision. It happens to be something like the effort to try to undermine or repeal the FACE Act, or just simply not enforce it. It happens to lead to efforts to make sure that at pharmacies, that pharmacists will not fill orders for prescription birth control and things like that. So many of the things that people don't necessarily see, there's been enormous funding that's been behind it in order to try to make things latch on. It took a while, but Dobbs is one of those results. And so with these law firms funding this march for life, and notice that even the terminology of that is something that's worth people being skeptical about, because it's not actually about life. And not at that march will there be conversations about or speeches about how do we protect, promote, make sure that little girls and that women have lives that are full and flourishing and fulfilling. There won't be speeches about let's make sure that they have equal pay. There won't be speeches about let's make sure that there's an opportunity that any brown, Black, Asian girl, Indigenous girl is going to have the opportunity for college and gainful employment. There aren't going to be talks like that. And there are going to be no talks that are about, well, what do the issues mean in terms of civil punishment and also criminal punishments in the lives of women? The United States incarcerates more women than any other country in the world. And those incarcerations happen to do with inability to pay rent and things like that, writing bad checks, and also with matters of drug use and drug addiction. But you're not going to find speeches about that. How do we create a better criminal justice system, or get rid of it altogether, or do something that actually helps these women? And let me just say on this note, because I do think that these issues are very intersectional, it costs less to send a woman to Princeton than it does to send her to prison in New Jersey, right? So there are going to be conversations about, well, how do we rehabilitate women within these contexts? And let me just add that the next cohort coming up in terms of incarceration, the incarceration of women connected to their pregnancies, the policing of them and their wombs. You told us that you used a drug during pregnancy. Guess what? Your next stop is going to be with the popo at jail, right? So these marches are not about quality of life of the women who are here and living, but instead they are about this brief period of time in which there's gestational development.
And when you look at the board of directors and the partners of these law firms, which we have, rich ass white men for the most part, and leading with this permission by God to punish women, there's sort of this thread that feels really awful. And, I love that you said that, because the intersectional piece is something that is only going to save us. If we are looking at these lenses through, their oppression is very intersectional. They are fighting all of these battles on the same front, and they see them as such. And I feel like we can do better as activists to understand reproductive justice and understand intersectional feminism, to see that what is happening to immigrants, what is happening to trans folks, what is happening to women and girls. When you said they're not going to be talking on stage about how to make young girls safer, in fact, our Congress is trying to get legislation passed where strangers can look under the outfits of young people who are not of age to check to see if they have the genitalia that they feel matches their gender. And so not only are they not protecting us, they are creating more harm.
Legislating harm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's legislating violence, isn't it? And it's
Yes.
important to actually name that.
Yes.
And it's important to be able to speak specifically to it and these harms. So let me name someone and then think about how we can do the work that she did. And so I want to name Polly Murray.
Polly Murray!
I want to name her book on race laws in the United States because her treatise on race laws in the United States tells us what really happened. So there is the story of Rosa Parks, which is really important when she, as an activist, refuses to surrender her seat, which leads to her arrest and national attention to what's taking shape. But what Polly Murray does is she actually documents the thousands of race-based laws. So it's not just that moment which we can fixate on, which actually helps us to swallow then and ignore what all was going on in Jim Crow, right? So to really understand Jim Crow through the laws that were documented by Polly Murray was that in certain places, if you were Black, you couldn't play checkers publicly. You couldn't play chess publicly. You couldn't bowl in the local bowling alley. You couldn't play billiards. And to think that there were lawmakers actually sitting in legislative houses saying, yep, let's draft this law saying Black people may not play checkers. And these are not laws from the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. These are laws from the 1950s. The 1960s. Black people may not swim in the local swimming pool. All of these kinds of laws really meant to dehumanize people, to stigmatize people, to keep them in a second-class citizenship. So, Liz, when you mention, what members of Congress will be doing with these, basically upskirt kinds of laws that would permit something like that, there is no telling how far it could go because we've seen it before. And we've seen that disregard of humanity. We've seen the effort to disgrace and to denigrate. And that's already on display with the executive orders that have already been signed, those that are being contemplated, and what members of Congress are contemplating.
I'm normally pretty resilient. I see things, I know my purpose, I have some focus. And this week I felt a little bit broken. And I wondered, because you are a scholar of history and because you, in my life, have been somebody who I've been able to turn to and say, I'm freaking out, get me back on my path. I was wondering if you could help out our listeners with how we remain in this fight when it does seem like it's dark.
Well, it is dark and it is stark. And so we must acknowledge that. But we also must pay attention to the fact that there are those who came before us. But for them, we wouldn't have even had the freedoms and privileges that we have today. And I think in honor of their legacy, these many women who contributed to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, 1965 Voting Rights Act, these women who baked cakes, baked cookies and sold them, had the fried chicken dinners from their churches. They had no Bill Gates to write them big checks. They had no big donors, Ford Foundation or others to write checks and say, we see you as you're integrating that lunch counter. We see you as you're refusing to get your food at the back door. We see you as you demand that you deserve to be able to walk through the front door of that department store. We see you as you, Ruby Bridges' mother, is making this tremendous sacrifice such that your daughter can show the world that segregation must come to an end and it's inconsistent with constitutional principles and values. I think in honor of these women who've been so brave and courageous over time, that we straighten our backs a little bit, right? And we look forward, recognizing the pain of this moment, but also seeing the tremendous inspiration of the legacy that they've left behind for us. And I think in honor of them and Fannie Lou Hamer, right, we march forward. We roll up our sleeves, Shirley Chisholm's and so many more, and we keep moving. And that's what we're going to do.
That's what we are going to do.
Dr. Goodwin, that is such a breath of air for me. I really do feel like the last month has been dark, and then, Monday happened and it felt even darker. And hearing you say that is a balm. It doesn't lessen the work and it doesn't lessen the effort, but it does give some key inspiration that I am going to take to heart and I find extremely valuable. Thank you so much for that.
And thank you so much for always bringing that and reminding us of why we do this work and just being a mentor to us here at FBK and AAF.
Thank you.
Where would you like people to find you?
They can find me at Georgetown. I am on Blue Sky. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, and they can still even find me over at X too.
Yikes.
Oh my God, you are a trooper. Fighting the fights over on X. Dr. Michele Goodwin, thank you for coming and giving us such a needed perspective during this time. You're the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Dr. Goodwin. To support her work, be sure to follow her on social and subscribe to her podcast On the Issues via Ms. Studios. You can find links in our show notes.
Okay, kids, it's time for our annual recap of the March for Life, Patriarchy's Unbornapalooza. Here's the opening video of how they describe it.
Only one march has happened every year since 1974. And in just a few hours, thousands of marchers will fill the streets of Washington, D.C.
We're here to march and to show solidarity for the baby in the womb.
We march to be a voice for the voiceless.
We march to end abortion.
We march for both mom and baby.
I just want every single baby to be valued and every single woman to know that she's important and she should be loved.
They're partaking in the annual March for Life, the largest human rights display in the world.
That's right. It's the March for Life. 52 years running, started the year after Roe v. Wade was the law of the land. It's an event by anti-abortion extremists that gathers over 100,000 people in Washington, D.C., with many marches all over the country. It's astonishing. If you're like, the March for Life, what's that? That in 52 years, it gets little or no mainstream media attention, which is in large part how we ended up with literal ban on abortion. They bus in people from churches, Christian businesses, and it is basically not just a march, it's a weekend. And the march kind of kicks it off where they have speakers at the march. They have like senators and Congress people. They have activists. They have religious figures. They have people testifying. And then they basically spend the weekend in DC raising money, strategizing, and planning how the administration that they are handed is going to help further the cause of destroying our lives. Moji and I watched the whole thing, and we're going to take you through how the 2025 March for Life laid out its plans for the total destruction of our world, our lives, and our values. Before we get into the sort of nitty gritty of it, what were your initial vibes?
Well, the vibes were very much victory lap, right? They 2 years ago, they marched because of Roe v. Wade had been overturned. And I feel like all the ones since then have been some form of victory march. But this one is one where they're like, we have politicians, all of them, all the big ones, and we can just celebrate the work that we've done and how much more we can get done.
Well, and Trump was the very first president to ever personally speak at the march in 2020. This year they had Big Mike Johnson, Big John Thune,
and Big J.D. Vance.
and Big J.D. Vance, and Trump sent in a video. And so, yeah, I mean, they were just so overjoyed with themselves and really kind of hitting the big major themes that we knew that they would. They were everybody talked about the pardons, which we're going to get to in its own bulk in a minute, repealing the FACE Act.
Everyone talked about Jesus, because the other part that you didn't sort of drop into your intro is that it's a very, very Jesus heavy event. It has a lot of denominations of Christianity, but only Christianity.
It's true. And what's interesting about that, it's heavy Catholic and heavy sort of quote unquote respectability people, although it was interesting to see that some Proud Boys and some Patriot Front people were taking the train in DC to the march, while the March for Life always acts like they don't have extremists because they're the people who just care about the moms and the babies. But they've had some nefarious people, a priest named Frank Pavone, who has literally been defrocked, who literally did a YouTube video where he had fetal remains on an altar.
Yes, that's Frank.
It's the classic where Ben Shapiro spoke at the march a few years ago and said, we wouldn't even abort Hitler. That's how much we love babies. And, I think a lot of times people forget that within the anti-abortion movement, there are factions. These people are one faction. They're the ones that the politicians talk to the most. They're the ones with the most money, the biggest lobbies. They're the ones that have the lawyers that fight all the battles. Then there's the other ones who are like, no, we're going to put you in jail. You're going to get the death penalty for having abortions, the abolitionists. But those people are slowly creeping into.
They're being normalized in some way. Absolutely. I also want to go back to what you were saying about Patriot Front and other hate groups that are there. Before the global pandemic of 2020, we went to as an organization, several March for Lives, and you could see them. They weren't on stage, but those people were still there. Their presence was felt off stage. This isn't the first time that Patriot Front and organizations like that have attended the march. This is also part of their duty. I feel like probably when January 6th happened, they probably were like, we're going to do January 6th. They're going to do this. They're going to hit the March for Life. Like, it feels like it's all in the list of things that they do in the beginning of January in DC.
And I don't know about you, Moji, but it feels massively frustrating that when this many anti-abortion, misogynistic, patriarchal, garbage people descend on Washington, D.C. for 52 years, that it's lost on mainstream media or liberal media. Right-wing people know this happens every year. Right-wing media talks about it all the time.
All the time.
And it's never covered. Like, even activists don't try to organize to protest it. I can't tell you how frustrating it is to have people be able to gather people for the Women's March and not say, why aren't we gathering thousands of people to literally counter protest an event that is solely designed to erase pregnant people and keep women into these subservient roles. It's maddening.
It's also propaganda for the kids, right? A lot of you brought up in the busing, they bus in children, they bus in high schoolers, and they bus them all in to sort of get them into the fever of like, this is what we do. This is part of our religious practice. There really is a sort of element to it that feels like going to this march is a part of a certain group's religious practices.
Right. And so, this year, aside from the sort of emboldened victory lap they had, they never disappoint in this portraying our side as whole monsters for wanting people to be able to choose parenting as an option and to also not have them die during troubling pregnancies, or to not have infants suffer if the pregnancy viability is not going to, work. And they also do this thing, like one of the big themes that was this year, that it's every year, but it felt like it was on steroids this year, is this kind of boss mom vibe that they throw out there, which makes me really angry for a couple reasons. One, it's this, no matter what your pregnancy is, no matter what challenges you may face after you have your pregnancy, you can do it. No matter what, you can do it. You got this. When some people don't have it, not everyone has the capacity to parent.
I was going to say they trivialize capacity, right? They say if your capacity isn't up here for parenting, they trivialize that choice. They don't actually look at it as a respectable, as an honorable choice. Also, there's a lot of erasure, right? Like they're having their victory march. They're talking about pro-life victories, and again, air quotes all around this pro-life because there's nothing pro-life about this march. But there was no conversation about people who are suffering in states with bans. There's no conversation about these states that have banned abortion, most of them having really, really terrible maternal mortality rates. It really is very fetus focused and erases anyone who doesn't have a healthy pregnancy or is unwilling to endure a challenging pregnancy.
One of the speakers who really hit me was a woman named Beverly Jacobson, who has a nonprofit called Mama Bear Care, where she pushes the belief that no one ever needs an abortion, that anyone can handle any pregnancy, any kind of pregnancy, just because she has a child with special needs.
Liz, they also want to end EMTALA, which I don't understand. If you end EMTALA, what happens when a person is born with a child with life-harming issues?
And as we know, abortion bans have erased gynecological care from states. When you look at Idaho and Texas and Missouri and Louisiana, and the number of people who are just like, peace out, I'm not practicing here.
Also, I want to say only one person on that stage said prenatal care. One person.
Right.
In a whole fetishization of pregnancy, only one person talked to the kind of thing that parents need to have a healthy pregnancy, prenatal care.
And just also, there's a couple of people like, we need the men to get involved. It's like indicating the men are not involved. And again, partnering is helpful when parenting. If you have a partner, you want your partner to parent with you. But if people choose to parent without partners, those resources aren't available. And every single other policy of their Lord and Savior, Trump Christ, is to cut any help for TANF or Medicaid or any help for even the child tax credit. They want to get rid of that. And so it's disgusting to stand there and talk about referring to their march as the largest human rights event in the world and not talk about the human rights of anyone living outside of the womb.
When they talk about human rights, they also painted anyone who would consider abortion as evil. I heard that from the stage several times.
Yes.
And they said that people who are talking to you are evil. And I think there was one, the keynote speaker said, she was like, be that person a person will call when they need an abortion. And they were like, oh, be a rat?
Yeah.
Be someone who is untrustworthy? I don't know. It's just really distressing to watch them fetishize fetus and really erase actual harm in the policies that these politicians that they were lauding have. They're not going to push anyone's life forward.
Well, and I just want to say, so we had John Thune, we had Mike Johnson, we had Chris Smith from New Jersey, Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis talked about Florida and the ballot initiatives and was talking about basically saying that they fought a war against what the majority of people wanted, and they won, which was a really disturbing framing because, as we know, Florida has put up so many roadblocks to get a ballot initiative passed. They have 57% of the vote, but in Florida, you have to have a 60% threshold. So, it's kind of like the unspoken thing with Ron DeSantis and the disingenuous nature of why he spoke was really them screaming and applauding how hard and how much money they raised in making sure that what the people wanted, they didn't get.
And his mic drop was the line, Florida is where woke goes to die and babies come to live. But again, their maternal mortality sucks. No one's going to Florida to get a baby.
No
one's going to Florida for birthing.
Or for good hospital and medical care, for sure. But what I thought was interesting was, so you have the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader both speaking, right? They both spoke basically in platitudes because, as we know, John Thune thought his mic drop was going to be getting the Born Alive Act passed, but it didn't pass. So all they kept saying is it passed the House, and they didn't really drop policies. And I think part of the reason, Moji, that they didn't lay out specific policy plans was because Trump is such a wild card that they don't know what he'll do. So they don't want to be on record as being liars.
Yep, I think that's it. And also, yeah, they don't know. And truthfully, maybe jumping ahead here, but Trump did make an appearance via video, and he didn't give any real promises policy-wise.
Well, what he did promise was that he was going to prosecute people like you and I who protest at fake clinics, who protest and try to prosecute the anti-abortion extremists that were just released. And I think of all of the things that happened at this march, the victory that they kept coming to over and over again was, if you haven't heard the news, because January 6 pardons have just dominated it, and I have not seen mainstream media talk about this at all, 23 anti-abortion extremists who terrorized clinics and were prosecuted by a jury of their peers by a full trial on breaking federal charge known as the FACE Act, which is the Freedom to Access Clinic Entrances. They blocked these clinics, they were found guilty, and they were given jail time. Now, Trump's cronies and the anti-abortion movement are lying through their teeth, saying that these are peaceful praying protesters who were set up by the Biden DOJ and they shouldn't have been prosecuted and it was all a sham. So Trump pardoned them. And none of that is true. And that is what you're going to hear constantly. And so I would love to take some time, Moji, because these people that went to jail, you and I, through our activism at Abortion Access Front, have encountered at least half of them in person, counter-protested their behaviors, and have firsthand seen that they are not just peaceful protesters outside of clinics. And so I'd love to just talk a little bit about the years in the making of this and who these people are, and more importantly, who these people are that 100,000 people today and Trump and everybody else are celebrating their behavior, right?
Well, obviously, the people that were celebrating their behavior, and I would also count Trump as this, aren't paying any attention to their behavior, right? Like, I feel like there were petitions to the president, and then they just hear pro-life protesters and they get excited, but I don't think they know the details.
And I always feel scared about two things. Either they don't know or they know and they don't care. Because honestly, when you look at January 6th and you and I looking at these people being just put into the streets, it's like, what is law? What is terrorism? What is crime anymore? And how is any judge or anybody supposed to view this and think that asking juries, wasting our taxpayer dollars only to pardon people? It's a mockery of our justice system.
It reiterates that we're not safe, Liz.
It does reiterate that we're not safe. So basically, just to recap what the blanket of kind of what has happened is that these 23 people engaged, plotted, and organized clinic invasions in several different states. They were part of an orchestrated effort to invade a clinic. Oftentimes they would chain themselves together or tie themselves together either inside the clinic until they had to be carried out, or blocking the door of the clinics so that patients couldn't enter, and so that patients and staff were trapped inside of their clinic.
And they did it with such impunity that some of them, they were streaming it on their socials.
They were streaming it.
They would just stream this whole illegal activity on their socials, and someone would catch it and be like, "Wait, they're just streaming this."
Yeah,
they have no shame. They don't see anything wrong with their behavior.
When the FACE Act, which is
the law that they were breaking.
So this federal act was in 1994 is when it was enacted. And it came to be because there was so much clinic violence. Clinics were being bombed. There's been arson. Physicians were being murdered in their homes, at their clinics, in their churches. And so they decided that they needed a federal law that would try to stop these people from blocking these entrances and invading these clinics and going into exam rooms. And the only way they could get it passed, if it wasn't just clinics that provide abortion, because let's be clear, this is about clinics that provide abortion. It's not any other kind of clinic. So the way that they could get it passed was if they added churches. You couldn't, chain yourself or block the entrance to a church. And the fake clinics that we talk so often about, which actually don't provide health care. So it's a mystery how they're thrown in there, which shows just how much we have to go in educating people on what fake clinics are, right? And so for years, it was just really hard for a clinic to prove that these people were breaking the law, because law enforcement was sort of on the side of these people invading the clinics. There wasn't any physical evidence, but with the entering of being able to Facebook Live your event, or us finding out about it and sending people to film it, all of a sudden organizations popped up that have been instrumental in capturing that data, collecting that data, and even going undercover to find out and hear them planning. So dossiers could be created and cases could be brought before the FBI. And so it's not like, even Trump said in his video, he name checked a woman named Paula Harlow and said a woman who was praying outside of the clinic. And that is just not true. And you're going to hear that all the time. Paula Harlow was sentenced to 2 years because she invaded and blockaded a clinic in Washington, D.C., along with other anti-abortion activists. She used force and physical obstruction to execute the blockade. And so when they say they were praying, know that they were not. That is not what they were tried on. That is not what they were sentenced on. Part of their tactics for a lot of these people, Lauren Handy is another one who is member of this. It's called POW. And she was one of the ringleaders in getting people to blockade the clinic doors using their bodies, furniture, and chains and ropes. And then once the blockade was established, as Moji and I have said, they would live stream their activities. Like when you're live streaming your
crimes,
you are not a victim, right?
Right.
You're not a victim. And she didn't just do it once. She has traveled to multiple states.
Many of these people didn't do it once. These people are repeat offenders. These people, it's even if you were just, and we're back to the air quotes, praying in front of a clinic. You go state to state praying in front of the clinic. That sounds like a conspiracy to me.
That's right. And Lauren Handy, even weirder, and was not charged for what Moji and I are about to tell you, is at one point at this very clinic, a truck that comes and disposes of medical waste at clinics came to this clinic, and she and her cohort stole 115 fetuses off the truck.
115. Liz, I haven't stolen 115 of anything.
Same. Put it in coolers and in their freezers.
And distribute it amongst their friends.
Gave it to other anti-abortion people to do unboxing videos. Now, there was an investigation, and this is the part that I don't understand. So the investigation said there is no illegal activity. These abortions were not performed nefariously. They were legal. But I don't know why you can just take fetal remains and keep it in your freezer and then give it to other people. Like, I'm unclear why there were not prosecutions for this.
I want to elevate an injustice because Brittany Watts was arrested and jailed for improper disposal or abuse of a corpse for her own fetus during her own miscarriage. And so I don't understand how you could have 115 and it be a nothing burger.
No, I don't either. And then started this hashtag justice for the 5 because there was 5 that were abortions that were performed later in pregnancy.
They named these fetuses and gave them religious rights.
At a press conference with Ted Cruz and several other people who were part of their invasions, including a woman named Joan Bell, who is another woman that they keep saying she is an older woman in her mid-70s. You know what? These people are not old women praying. These people started anti-abortion terrorism in their 30s.
Right.
In their 30s. And Joan Bell has been arrested more than 120 times for anti-abortion crimes and believes it's a justifiable homicide to murder abortion providers. She signed her name to a piece of paper that she said that. She and her husband, Chris Bell, who ran some creepy fake clinic maternity home called Good Counsel Home for Women, employed a guy named James Charles Kopp, who went on to shot and kill Dr. Barnett Slepian, a New York OBGYN who performed abortions in his kitchen. So she's one of the ones that Lila Rose today at the March for Life gave a shout out to as a hero.
Lila Rose is the president of Live Action, and she's a menace.
She is, if you ever saw some of those Planned Parenthood videos where they went undercover to set up Planned Parenthood employees, she works closely with the guy that made those videos. She herself has gone undercover to try to entrap abortion providers by it being in a costume and making up wild stories about who she is. But to shout out some of these people and to praise, again, they're saying that the January 6th people were peaceful protesters,
patriots.
And then these people, they are celebrating. The vice president celebrated and shouted them out. The Speaker of the House shouted them out. Almost every speaker on the stage today shouted them out and was excited. And let's be clear that these people are going to go right back to the clinic.
Yep.
And they are going to be free to protest with impunity. Why? Because of the second thing that they talked about at the March for Life today, which is the introduction, and this is one of the few pieces of legislation that we heard about, the introduction of repealing this FACE Act that we were just talking about and getting rid of it entirely. Chip Roy in the House, Mike Lee in the Senate are introducing a law that will completely strip the federal prosecution possibilities when these people invade clinics. And so now,
and also, and even if this law doesn't pass, even if this law goes the way of the Born Alive Protection Act, both Trump and J.D. Vance have said explicitly at the march today that they have no intention to enforce the FACE Act.
No, not only do they have no intention to enforce the FACE Act, Donald Trump in his video said he's going to actively prosecute those who unjustifiably put these peaceful protesters in jail. So to recap what happened at the March for Life, it's important to really realize that we don't have enough talking information, media outlets reporting on what the freeing of these anti-abortion extremists is going to mean for providers, is going to mean for patients, is going to mean for advocates like us who are trying to expose them, and it's going to mean for any consequences for the harm that they will do.
It's essentially open season on clinics by people who are excited to do that work.
That's exactly right. And for people who are pushing this boss mom narrative so hard while cutting all resources and programs to help people, because anytime the anti-abortion movement acts like they're going to care about resources or helping people, there's always caveats that have to do with converting someone to Christianity. When they say, we support these pregnancy resource centers and we provide these centers for people to get diapers and all this stuff, you have to volunteer your time there. You get limited supply. You have to take classes on Christianity.
You have Christianity shoved down your throat.
That's exactly right. And judgment about how you got pregnant and the life you want to live.
And sometimes pressures to give up your child.
That's exactly right. And so when you look at how this fits into the totality of the world that we're living in, California must do what we say before we help them with their fires, right? If you're pregnant, you have to do and live the way we want you to give you help. It's a pattern that we all need to pay attention to. But when it comes to talking about these anti-abortion centers that they want to empower by, defunding Planned Parenthood, which was also mentioned from the stage today from Representative Chris Smith, and putting that money towards these fake pregnancy centers, they do not provide care. They provide dogma and Christian propaganda and shame to force people into parenting or at least carrying their pregnancy for someone else, right?
Yep.
And so between that and between releasing these anti-abortion terrorists, who, by the way, there was a few of the J6ers who also are protesting outside of clinics, that were busted and released, who are also participate in these kind of behaviors. And in the comments today, even when we were watching the March for Life, there was commenters saying, I can't wait to get back out to the clinics. I'm going to go out to the clinics now and protest.
And I want to reiterate, there is no protection for providers currently. They're not going to get it in this administration at all. And we find that local law enforcement is also rarely interested in protecting providers.
If they're not going to enforce it, what's the point of even having any of it? And they'll repeal it so that it doesn't even have to happen.
Whether or not they repeal it, it's not helpful for people right now.
That's exactly right. And so the march just basically celebrated one role, and that is you should be mothering no matter what, no matter what your capacities are, that pro-life people have been unjustly prosecuted for praying when that's a lie, and that fake clinics are going to be the next place where we are going to be putting our money. I was surprised they didn't talk more or have any lawyers on stage, and that they didn't talk more about the HHS and how to curb access to abortion pills. That was odd that was missing.
If I'm honest, this one wasn't so meaty. I mean, it was meaty in that they could talk about the things that the Trump administration has recently done, the new Congress has done, but it wasn't meaty. I feel like historically they've had more dynamic speakers. They've had more dynamic stories. This was very one note. One thing that struck me, Liz, is the complete absence of people of color and Black people from the stage. There was one Asian man, and that was it for anyone who was not white.
Yeah, that was it. And it felt to me like that's always kind of been the case.
They usually get 1 or 3 tokens out there. You know what I mean? They get some basketball player or some baseball player. Or they get some woman who has a nonprofit of color. I think that this is the whitest one I've seen.
Yeah, it has been white. And we haven't even gotten to all the lies.
Oh my God, Liz, the lies.
So many lies. First of all, they just keep pushing this narrative that pro-abortion people like us are constantly telling people not to have their kids. Don't have kids. Every time anyone's pregnant, they act like we walk up to them and be like, you should abort that. Like that was the ongoing theme. It wasn't like we're trying to help you because your pregnancy is not viable, which is
nope.
If doctors are talking to people about pregnancies that are gone wrong, it's because there is a real need for them to think about if that child is going to live or what kind of life that child's going to have.
Or what kind of pregnancy a person wants to endure with no payout at the end, right? The payout of pregnancy is a kid, if that's what you're into.
Exactly.
There's no place in this country where it is illegal to force a person with fetal anomalies to have an abortion. Every person who wants to carry a pregnancy to term can.
Yes.
And they act like doctors are out here forcing women. This woman has a whole freaking nonprofit to fight a thing that doesn't exist.
But also, they dropped this fact. 83% support fake clinics in a poll done by who? The people who fund the fake clinics.
Also, most people don't know about fake clinics, right? So if you don't know about fake clinics and someone just says, hey, do you support a place that supports pregnant people? Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, I'll support that. Oh, you're going to give people stuff? And then every year, without fail, it's like you can just set a clock by it. They have Representative Chris Smith, who's from New Jersey, psycho-Catholic, every year talk. And every year he spews some crazy ass bullshit that happens during an abortion. And this year he did not disappoint.
Today, we recommit to exposing abortion methods, which the other side never wants to talk about, to a society that has chosen to be blind to the realities of brutally dismembering helpless babies with sharp curettes, knives. And the kids, as we know, feel pain from at least the 12th week on as they're being dismembered. And also the poisoning of babies by literally starving them to death with the abortion pill.
Does he not know how Miffy works?
Obviously, they don't know how anything works, or we wouldn't be having this podcast. So, abortion medication is done in America in the first 10 weeks of pregnancy. It does nothing. Starving, I don't even know what that means. What it does is it stops the development of the fetus and then it expels it from your uterus. There is no starving of any living thing.
You know what you need to starve a person? You need a digestive system.
And then Trump in his video yet again said we're going to stop the Democrats from their afterbirth abortions.
He said afterbirth abortions, and I was really stumped with that one. I'm flummoxed, Liz. What is an afterbirth abortion? That sounds like murder.
Well, I think that like you do pass the afterbirth. The placenta is also called afterbirth. So I don't know. I feel like you don't abort that, you deliver that. But
he's reaching out to the people who eat their placentas. I get it. I understand now.
But, just those blatant lies of like starving the fetus with abortion pills and afterbirth abortion, and 83% support these fake clinics because they don't know what they are. They can never just promote something and sell it on its merits.
And to go into the lies too, that another theme that we haven't really talked on is them saying that we have science on our side. And it's like, well, you have science on your side if you fundamentally don't understand how science works.
Or make up science. You have your own science, or your own set of science. And also like in the overarching of this whole March for Life, the thing that we haven't talked about is that you have speaker after speaker who are privileged white people talking to people who are predominantly Black and brown, who will suffer the most from their policies writ large, and none of them are on stage. So I think we should wrap it up because we've given you a little taste of what the March for Life really is versus what they purport to be, who they celebrate, convicted terrorists, celebrating pregnancy centers that actually don't help people, shaming and marginalizing people who choose abortion, and shaming and marginalizing people who can't parent in the way that they decide you should parent. That was my takeaway. What were your takeaways?
Those are really the top line takeaways, and also just that they don't understand science. I need them to understand science if you're going to talk about it and say you have it on your side. I also find this a fundamentally racist activity. Again, not just because there were no people of color on stage, but with this whole anti-DEI push, this anti-woke push, it seemed like a pointed remark. It seemed like a pointed choice.
Yeah, it was a pointed choice. And for those of you that don't know, one of the things we do at Abortion Access Front is we track these folks all the time. Moji and I know with which we speak when it comes to these people that were pardoned. We have faced off with many of them. And if you go to one of our projects, it's called Hypocrites Unmasked. You can read about the March for Life. You can read about Operation Save America. You can read about several factions in the anti-abortion movement, including a lot of the people that were pardoned, and get a little bit more information about who they are. And if you want to do something, we're going to recommend that you go to one of our other projects called Expose Fake Clinics at exposefakeclinics.com. There you can get resources and information and action items you can learn about, and then you can help expose what these fake crisis pregnancy centers do and what they are, and how you can help people who may fall prey to them learn about who they are before they actually set foot in one of them. So we've got a lot of action items on that page, exposefakeclinics.com. Both of those web addresses will be in our show notes.
Whew, that's our show. Thanks for listening. And thanks again to Dr. Michele Goodwin. And remember to follow her on socials and subscribe to her podcast On the Issues via Ms. Studios.
Oh, did we make you smarter today? Did we make you laugh? Hopefully we did one of those things. If so, show some love by liking, subscribing, and giving us a 5-star rating. Plus, stay connected with us on social media at Abortion Front across all social platforms. Remember, with this media blackout that's happening, and with the way that this administration is taking down corporate media, you're going to have to rely on people like us to keep you informed and get you activated to defend our democracy.
Woo! And now more than ever, aren't you looking for where you might fit in to do some abortion activism? Because we've got a 5-part activist training series, Operation Save Abortion, at operationsaveabortion.com. And while you're there, you can visit our super cool activist calendar, which is full of local and national actions and educational opportunities. This week's featured action is the Gender Liberation Movement's mass call on Monday, January 27th from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Activists from all over can hop onto Zoom to join Gender Liberation Movement for their first ever virtual mass call. With the Trump era officially here, we've got to build up our people power. So join and learn about their work from previous marches and that famous bathroom sit-in in Capitol Hill about a month ago to see what they have planned next. The link can be found in our activist calendar.
And this week's clinic spotlight is the Joan G. Loverling Health Center in Greenland, New Hampshire. They're looking for everything from snacks to books to exam table paper. Head over to the Amazon link in our bio and show them some love at our Adopt a Clinic program.
Also, join us next week. We're going to talk to Kimberly Smith of State Line Abortion Access Partners and Abortion Access Front about reproductive emergency response during disasters. We'll also talk to singer and author Nico Case about her memoir, The Harder I Fight, The More I Love You.
And join our Patreon. You'll support great content and great cool merch and experiences. And you get a birthday shout out.
Woohoo!
All pledges support this podcast and all of our activism at Abortion Access Front. Pledge patreon.com/Feminist Buzzkils. FBK is edited by Remy DeTournay and is produced by Abortion Access Front.
And we generally end our show with show your whole ass, but we're not even doing that this week because this whole episode is chock full of ass.
So until next week, stay strong, stay focused. Go expose some fake clinics. Go check out Hypocrites Unmasked. Go do something for yourself. Bye-bye.
Feminist Buzzkils, the podcast from Abortion Access Front. New episodes drop Friday. When BS is poppin', we pop off. And if you want to support our podcast and all the work of Abortion Access Front, Like, subscribe, and join our Patreon at patreon.com/feministbuzzkills.